Well, it's good to be back with you for another day as we are continuing on through our Outsiders Bible study. My name is Kevin Young, and I have the privilege of being lead clergy here at Christ Table, and I'm so grateful that you are with us along for the ride of this journey. If you'd like to find out more, though, about Christ Table, who we are, what we do, you can visit the URL that is right up there, www.christstable.today. When you get there, sign up for our email list so that you will know everything that is happening around Christ Table. There's a lot more in addition to these Bible studies. If you'd like more information about this study in particular, you can go to the URL that is at now the bottom of the screen right there, go.christstable.today/outsiders. This is a 24-day study spread out over 6 weeks where we're looking at 24 individuals who are outside of the community of faith and how they had an impact, almost always positively, on the spiritual world, on their own lives, and how it was beneficial, actually, in a lot of ways to be an outsider. And so there's a PDF there. You can download the study guide for this for absolutely free, no strings attached right there. If you'd like to take advantage of that, go.christstable.today/outsiders. Well, why don't we just kind of keep moving on this morning without delay, because this is a story that many of you may be familiar with, but I'm going to take just a very small 18 verses snippet of the very beginning of the story, and we're going to just kind of make a few observations about that. If you've not read the entire story, this would be a great one for you to do on your own, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, on your relationship with God, or with church or worshiping communities. This is just a brilliant, amazing story, and also has a lot of overtones that impact the direction of our lives spiritually and hopefully in positive ways. And so we're going to be in the book of Ruth, ancient and incredible Jewish story, and we'll be in the first 18 verses, Ruth chapter 1, verses 1 through 8. Now, when we come to Ruth chapter 1, I want to do a little bit of a setup before I jump into the text. Come to Ruth chapter 1, we are introduced to a family, and the main character in this story ends up being Ruth, but at the very beginning it's actually Naomi. And one might even say that even though the book is titled Ruth, this is actually kind of Naomi's story, but Ruth kind of becomes a primary character the further that we move more and more into it. But at the beginning, we're introduced to Naomi and her husband, and then their two sons and their wives. And the story here is that Naomi and her husband have moved away during a famine to a place called Moab. And Moab was outside of the land of Judah. It was outside of where the Jews were really supposed to live and be a part of. And it also was a place where they were not supposed to intermarry, not supposed to have children with these individuals. And so they were kind of moving in with the enemy whenever Naomi and her husband moved to Moab, and then especially allowing their two sons to marry to Moabite women was then going a step further. Imagine, it would be like marrying outside of your ethnicity if your family is very racist. It would be like marrying outside of your religion if your family is very fundamentalist. This is kind of both things are at play here. And over the first few verses, all of the male characters die. Bad luck for them, right? Naomi's husband dies. Ruth, her husband dies, as well as her sister-in-law, her husband dies. And so we're kind of left with Naomi and then these two daughters-in-law who are not her biological children. So Naomi hears in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people back home, back in Judah, by giving them good crops again. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law get ready to leave Moab and return to her homeland. I can imagine what it would be like as a black sheep, having essentially turned your back on all of those people who were your neighbors in order to go and find food and safety and lodging for yourself during this time where there wasn't enough to go around for others. You can imagine that those who stayed probably would not be very happy at her coming home, especially coming home without a man, especially coming home without having now having these two Moabite daughter-in-laws with her. Whether or not they would accept Naomi at all, who knows? But the fascinating thing is even though they broke many customs and actual Jewish laws, essentially, by doing what they did and intermarrying and all of these things, there doesn't seem to be in any way, shape, or form the slightest hint that the death of Naomi's husband or the death of their two sons or any of that was judgment for moving outside of the boundaries of Judah or moving outside of the boundaries, essentially, of their faith. And that's fascinating to me because usually in the Old Testament and the Hebrew text, what we see is a lot of blessings and curse talk. And I have to admit, many rabbis have commented on this, and many rabbis essentially say that there is blessing. I mean, there is curse that comes as a result of this, but a lot of that really, frankly, just kind of seems to be reading into the text because we see really nothing of that in the way that the story is told or from God himself. And so I think that it's safe for us to say that they move to being outside of the worshiping community in ways that the worshiping community says are totally anti-God and anti-acceptable. And yet there doesn't seem to be any punishment or curse from God for that. And the deaths are not ever in any way, shape, or form attributed to that being the case. In fact, what we kind of see as the story plays out is that it's the opposite, that God actually blesses them rather than curses Naomi and her two daughters-in-law. So with her two daughters-in-law, she sets out from the place where she had been living outside of the boundaries of the worshiping community of God, and then took the road that would lead them back to Judah. But on the way, Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go back to your mother's homes. Go back to Moab, and may the Lord reward you for your kindness to your husbands," which is to my deceased sons and to me. "May the Lord bless you with the security of another marriage." Then she kissed both of them goodbye, and they all broke down and wept. They both said, "No, we want to go with you to your people. We want to stay with you. We want to support you. We are all in for you, Naomi." But Naomi replied, "Why would you go on with me? I'm of no help or support to you. Can I still give birth to other sons who could grow up to be your husbands? There's no one that I can provide for you to take care of you. I probably am going back to die myself. No one's going to want to take care of me. What are you going to do? They're going to reject you. No, my daughters, return to your parents' homes, for I am too old to marry again. And even if it were possible and I were to get married tonight and bear sons, then what? Are you going to wait 14 years? Are you going to wait 20 years? Would you wait for them to grow up and then refuse to marry somebody else and marry you, a far older woman than they? No, of course not. This is a ridiculous plan. Things are far more bitter for me than for you. You can still rescue and save the rest of your life because the Lord himself has raised his fist against me. So again, they wept bitterly together, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung tightly to Naomi. "Look," Naomi said to her, "your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods, and you should do the same." Now, I want to go back here because I did say that there does not seem to be any hint that any of that was as a result of them moving out. The death of the husband is essentially for Naomi saying here that God has raised his fist against me in this. But again, there is no tie there to it being that she had gone to Moab, that any of that, because she had moved in order to save her family from the famine, is tied to that. So again, I think that we have to be very specific in saying that there is no specific place where it says that any of this was a judgment for what went on there. It could have been any reason that Naomi thought that the Lord had raised his fist against her. And I think one of the things that we have to think of is Naomi is still showing as much kindness as she can to these women under circumstances, and is doing the best thing for them, not for her. And if Naomi had seen or thought that her husband's death was in relation to these two women and the marriage and all that, she would be blaming them. So again, I don't want to speak against all the rabbis here, but there is nothing specifically in the text that says that what has happened here to Naomi is the result of her moving to the outside of the worshiping community. If we're going to be very specific with what goes on in the text, I think we need to be. So again, they weep together. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. Orpah decides to go ahead and go back, but Ruth actually takes a different path. Look, Naomi says to her, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people, and you should do the same. Naomi, encouraging them to remain an outsider. And sometimes remaining an outsider is preferable to the trauma of being an insider. I want to pause here and just kind of think and reflect on that for just a moment. Sometimes remaining an outsider is preferable to the trauma of being an insider. Naomi knows what awaits her, and definitely she knows what awaits Ruth and what awaits Orpah if they return back to Judah. They will likely die of starvation. There's not going to be anyone who's going to want to take care of them. It's going to be a very, very bitter situation. And it's almost as though Naomi is going back home in order to self-punish herself for the pain and the grief and the mourning that she's going through over her husband and her sons. But whatever motivation has caused her to go back home, she is encouraging these women to remain an outsider rather than walk through the trauma of being an insider. But Ruth says, do not ask me to leave you and turn back again. Wherever you go, I'm going to go. Wherever you live, I'm going to live. Your people are going to be my people, and your God will be my God. Wherever you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. And may the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. And when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she says nothing more and allows it to happen. Now, the interesting thing is if we continue to follow this story, this really becomes a story about redemption, not just of Naomi and of Naomi's story, not just the redemption of Ruth, but this becomes a grander story that seems to essentially be a narrative that also teaches us about the redemption of God for not just insiders, but also the redemption of God for outsiders as well. Follow this. Ruth eventually becomes an ancestor. I think it's the great-great-grandmother of King David, which also makes her in the line of Jesus. And so this is an incredible story of redemption, of Moabite being in the line of King David and being in the line of Jesus as well. But I think that this is also an incredible story of redemption for outsiders as well. And that if we watch and look at this, what we do is we see God essentially through Boaz and through circumstances and through Naomi caring for the outsiders himself. We see Naomi caring for Ruth, an outsider herself. We see Ruth caring for Naomi, who is now an outsider themselves. We see Boaz caring for Ruth, an outsider. And so this is really an example story to me and to us of how whenever the insiders are not caring for outsiders, that God himself cares for outsiders. So if you find yourself today feeling or being an outsider, it's my opinion that God cares for you himself when the insiders maybe should, but don't. Wherever you find yourself today, I hope that this story has had some meaningful impact for you, that you've maybe learned something or maybe thought about something in a different way. But either way, we'd love to hear your feedback on it, and feel free to do that in the comments or the chat. And I'll see you back here tomorrow. And until that time, happy reading.